Unconditional surrender, World War II in Europe. And here we are, just moving into September 1942. August was a big turn for the Allies, as it turned out. A number of things happened that were either considerably in their favour or a bit of a morale boost. So down here in the Middle East, the British Army finally got to grips with the Turks and drove them back out of Syria and all the way back inside Turkey. And the British have now landed an armoured unit down here as well, and more to the point, have sufficient income now to really be able to supply and pay for this kind of expensive naval and ground warfare over here. And the Turks, well, the Turks could be in some trouble. The Turkish national will is only 7, I think, now, and with 2 motorised units here and an armour unit ready to go in, although that motorised has to keep a fairly careful eye on this Turkish unit out here, the Turkish army out there, but a motorised and an armoured army could pile in and cause some fairly severe problems in Turkey. And there's also the American Navy down here now, and that's just providing basically free services. So that's a couple of free points of convoy, and up over here there's the 4th Fleet, which is just free intercepts into the Italians, and they're free because America doesn't have to keep track of production points. It's assumed to have whatever it needs, and so this 4th Fleet can throw out use sorties all it likes, and the proviso is that you can only take 2 off in any given sort of resupply. So in any turn you can only take 2 off, but it could use 6 sorties, and they're not paying for them. It's just it'll be limited in how quickly it can recover them. But so it can use 2 and then recover them, and use 2 and recover them, and that would normally be for production, and it's free. And similarly, this convoy here can just keep racking up sorties to keep things in supply and take 2 off, and it's free. And that again is, so that's 7. That's essentially 7 points of production that the British were having to pay, and are now getting that service for free from the Americans. So that's quite important. Up here on the Eastern Front, the Russians caused their first German casualty. Wow. And it was the Africa Corps. Let's see if we can find it. There it is. That was the first German casualty on the Eastern Front, the Africa Corps, which the Germans didn't send to Africa. Maybe in retrospect they should have put some more effort, or perhaps maybe it's not too late. Perhaps they should put more effort into helping their Italian and Turkish allies. I'm not sure whether perhaps it's too late. Perhaps they're just throwing good troops and good money and good everything after bad going in now. Perhaps they should just, I don't know what. I don't know. These are the sort of interesting questions that the game throws up. The Germans have done really quite well, and they've reached this position of being, pretty close to Moscow with a good solid, a reasonably solid sort of north-south line here, but at the expense of having any sort of support anywhere else. And certainly with the onset of winter on the Eastern Front, this is September, so this is certainly a good weather turn. But after this, I certainly think some of these air units are going to have to be redeployed elsewhere. The Germans have got to give some more consideration to throwing them in. And trying to cause the British some more problems, because at the moment The Turks are now getting stomped. The Italians are just being starved out as usual. Yeah. So the Germans, perhaps, I've gone for a very much throw everything at Russia and let their allies fend for themselves. And I don't know, perhaps might just continue to pursue that policy and see where it ends. I don't know if it's worthwhile trying to change course now. Might be interesting just to see where this goes. The other problem they've got, well, and I don't know how much of a problem this is. Sorry about the lighting up over here, the reflection with the lamp. In fact, I might move the camera around. The other problem they had is that last turn there's a bomber unit there which my cats have decided to have a play with. So let's get the tweezers out and let's get that bomber unit back in place. So that bomber unit went out and flew four sorties. I mean, the British knocked out the Luftwaffe there. The British have got 3 air units here, so it was pretty trivial to engage that, ground strike that air unit, ground strike it again, even though it won one of those ground strike air combats quite handily. The British then just threw in a completely fresh air unit, and then it was curtains for the Germans, and then it was grounded, and the bomber went in and put 4 bombed markers across Germany. Which brings up something that has slightly alarmed me about the game. The British carpet bombed Germany pretty much unopposed in August. Firstly, the dice roll didn't go in the British favour, so that had absolutely no effect whatsoever on the German economy. You can come down here and see that the German factory lost marker is on the 1, on the lowest possible point. But the other thing this brings me to is that the Germans get to make 2 rolls on the strategic warfare. They make one against the Russians each turn and one against the Western allies each turn. And the results of strategic warfare are either you win, in which case your factory lost marker goes down 1 and the opponent's goes up 1, or you draw, in which case they both go down 1, or you lose, in which case theirs goes down 1 and yours goes up 1. So for the Germans, what that essentially means is that marker can only really move upwards if they're losing the strategic warfare rolls against both the Western and the Soviets, Western Allies and the Soviets, because if the Soviets beat them in strategic warfare and that goes up to a 2, and then they draw with the Western powers, it goes back down to a 1. And if they draw with the Soviets, it doesn't go down to a 0, it stays there, and then they lose to the Western Allies and it goes up to a 2, and then next turn they draw with the Soviets and it goes back down to a 1, and they lose to the Western powers and it goes up to a 2, and it just bounces backwards and forwards between the 1 and 2 box, and that strikes me as slightly odd, in that there were 4 bombed markers all the way across Germany, and the Allies could have put down 6 bombed markers had they just chosen to throw the extra 2 sorties in. But there were 4 bombed cities in Germany, and irrespective of the fact that the dice roll went badly, the Germans could have ignored that simply by virtue of sinking some Russian shipping. It just seems very, very strange that the Germans can negate the fact that their cities have been bombed by the British by throwing a submarine marker up against the Russians and winning the economic strategic warfare against the Soviet Union, and therefore move their factory loss marker back down, even as Britain are raining bombs down on all their industrial heartlands, completely unopposed by the Luftwaffe. That does strike me as a slightly odd situation. Now I understand how production points and are in many ways a very elegant mechanism for controlling both production and the movement of ground units and the supply of air and naval forces, and they're in a sort of big unified mechanic, and it is very neatly done. It is very neatly done. This is just one situation where I found it, where I found the abstractions necessary to make that work, which for the most part you don't really notice, but in this case, sending a bomber over into Germany and bombing the hell out of multiple German industrial areas, and realising that actually you're wasting your time because the Germans can just beat the Russians at an economic warfare role, is slightly strange. But there we go. I've not got anything more to say about that. So moving swiftly on, I'm going to assume, therefore, that the Germans are not just going to sort of game this situation and just let the British bomb Germany unopposed, simply knowing that they can game the situation by beating up on Russia on the strategic roles. And so I did actually you can see there's a unit in there with a strategic move marker on it. That one there, that's a German air unit that I sort of strategic moved back from the eastern front up over here for the winter, because there's probably not going to be that much action on the eastern front in the winter, but the British might still be flying bombing missions. So that unit has come back to defend the sort of German factories, and there is another air unit obviously buried under there, and the Germans may actually fly this air unit out of Stavanger as well, rebase that somewhere down here into Holland, and or perhaps right down into the sort of Alsace area, out of ground striking range from the RAF, and throw some sort of screen up out of the range of ground strikes from the RAF, so that they can fly intercepts against the bombers. So that's the situation. Lots going on, as always. Lots of interesting little puzzles to solve, problems, new ideas popping up, and I'm really enjoying the game, and I have absolutely really no idea how well or poorly any side is doing, particularly, no idea whether what we're doing is the right thing for either side, whether I could have done, I'm fairly sure that I get that sort of nagging feeling, that nagging feeling that I could have done everything so much better for both sides, or for all three parties, for the Germans, for the Commonwealth, and for the Russians, Soviets. So I think I'm making a fairly newbie mistakes across the board, strategically, tactically, for all three sides. But it's playing out, and it's really really fascinating to just keep plugging away and seeing what's happening. Heading into October 42 in Unconditional Surrender, Great War in Europe. Great War in Europe, World War II in Europe, something like that. Unconditional Surrender, World War II in Europe. Yeah. Let's try and remember what I'm playing. Been playing it long enough, I ought to remember the name of it. Anyway, it's all gone wrong for the Italians in North Africa, yes again. There you can see the French North Africans the French North Africans have pushed the Italians out of Benghazi. That means that one Italian fleet and supply convoy had to sail home sharpish, and ended up back over there in southern Italy. And of course what that means is that now that fleet and the convoy with it has to try and supply everything. So the convoy under there, and it's just going to get intercepted from all quarters. It's got a home fleet over there. There's an American Fourth Fleet here. There's a carrier fleet there. It's got absolutely no chance of making even one supply run, let alone two. So the Italians are essentially hosed again, and will be pulling out their armies, voluntarily disbanding them, I would think, just so as not to lose any more national will, getting unsupplied armies defeated. And to be quite honest, the British troops that they had hoped to make a dent into Egypt, and there you can see there are only 2 garrisons, but if the Brits really wanted to, they've got a second army unit. The 8th Army is now in play, and then they've got more armour up here and a motorised up here. So if the British really wanted to swing back round through Egypt and head in the other direction and beat 9 bells out of the Italians, I don't think these Italian units would last long against 2 British armoured armies, and the motorised and garrisons would quite comfortably hold off the Turks for long enough. So I think the game is up here in North Africa. The only way for the Axis really to get down into this area is for the Germans to throw some units down this way. A German the Afrika Korps and perhaps an armoured unit coming down into this area might make things rather more interesting for the Axis. And ironically, there in the German mobilisation box is the Afrika Korps and 5th Panzer. So I'm going to think about that over the winter. We're coming into October, which means we've hopefully got some hope for, as far as the Axis is concerned. We've hopefully got some lousy weather coming up. It's severe weather in the cold zone, poor weather in mild and warm zone at the moment. So the weather is poor in the Mediterranean right now, and the Germans and their Italian allies are going to have another think about what to do to try and wrestle some initiative down here in North Africa, if indeed they can. And as part of that, actually, up on the Eastern Front, the Germans again have pulled back behind whatever defensive terrain they can find, mainly the Dnieper River and into some forests, and just behind a river line, gave up a couple of Russian cities just because because they didn't need them, basically. It's more valuable to them to preserve their forces and have a good strong line of defence than to be occupying cities that leave them exposed and too far forward. So they've pulled back to what they hope is quite a, they're trying to shorten their line, good defensive terrain, and just dig in and stay there for 2 years, 3 years. I guess one of the little things we could do with the Germans is work out how to thin this Eastern Front army down and still be viable defensively, so that we can get some force down into the Mediterranean, and how we're going to get supply across the Mediterranean, because there looks to be an awful lot of naval power down here, especially with the Americans in play. And there's even more. I mean, if the Americans wanted to play properly, they could. I mean, they're just leaving stuff kicking around this this entry box at the moment. You can see 8th Fleet there. Or is it 5th Fleet? No, 8th Fleet. So you know, they could bring that down into the Med as well if they wanted to, and cause merry hell with that. So yeah, really quite messy for the Axis at the moment. Other than the fact that this defeat in North Africa, I'm not sure what it gets, what it wins the Western forces, other than a bit of security of the Suez Canal and its control of sort of economy, but militarily, in terms of trying to defeat Germany and Italy, it doesn't. It's a defensive manoeuvre rather than an offensive one, and yeah, maybe it gives the Western Allies a launching off point to attack into into Italy or somewhere through here, or into Vichy, France, potentially. But is that the way to go? I have absolutely no idea right now. I really don't. So yeah, something of a lull, and there we go. These things happen because the weather gets bad, and you I find myself just kind of running out of ideas as to what I'm meant to be doing, and I have to stop and look again and take a deep breath, roll through a couple of turns, and then suddenly see some opportunities. So that's what's going to happen now, and hopefully I can crack through 2 or 3 or 4 winter turns quite quickly, and head back into some more active and aggressive turns come the spring. Unconditional surrender, World War II in Europe, and World War II is still rocking along in Europe, a little bit quicker than normal. I've got all the way through to January 43 now. The weather turned bad in October, and November and December have been very, very quick months, very quiet. We're into January 43, and the situation as we currently have it, the Italians have pulled back out of North Africa. Their North African adventure is pretty much over. So they vacated just dissolved their armies because they were out of supply, and it was it means you can get rid of them without losing national will. So they got back out of North Africa with the minimum of cost, and the British are now fully engaged with the Turks, but bad weather is really preventing them from making any progress in these mountains. So we've got 2 British armoured armies and a motorised up against some not great quality Turks, but the weather and the terrain make it more difficult for the British to get anywhere. And up on the Eastern Front we have the Russians now with a very robust layered defence, and this isn't now just all bog standard rubbish, 0 modified infantry. This is now peppered with armour and elite units, which still aren't as good as basic German units, but better than having nothing at all. So you can see in there, you can see armour in there, and units with little stars. Motorised infantry is new, and the ones with the red centres are shock, and they've got stars. So you can see that there's +1s and +2s littered all the way up that front line. And then they've got a second line of defence, if you can see it running from sort of the middle of the camera position there, from up through Kursk and Orel and up that line there, and then they've got another line of defence running down from where Moscow is down towards Rostov, back where the front line was before the Germans retreated back behind the safety of the river for the winter. And I don't think the Germans are planning to move. As I've said many times before, they're not in Russia to try and prove that they can grind Russia down. It's purely the practicalities of defending here seem better than defending over here somewhere. So they'll just, having room to fall back and form new defensive lines seems very worthwhile to them. And the Russians have got a lot of ground to make up, and it's not like this Russian army is superior to the German army in any way. So actually grinding this German army back is going to be, I think, really very, very tough indeed. And actually it's going to be extremely interesting to see what the Americans and British can put together from this direction or down here in the Mediterranean, to see if they've got any way of launching something that's going to trouble the Germans. I mean, troubling the Italians is no good at all. It's got to trouble the Germans, really, to try and siphon and weaken defences away from this eastern front and back towards the western front. The Germans have increased their presence over here in Western Europe, added an armour and a motorised. The Afrika Korps and Panzer Army got built. Afrika Korps got rebuilt, and the 5th Panzer got built over here. And there are 3 air forces over here now, as well as 3 or 4 infantry armies and most of the German garrisons. So it's not complete rubbish over here anymore, which it was, probably 6 or 8 months ago. The Germans have started to bolster this area and are wondering what's coming, and I'm wondering what's coming as well, because I have really very little idea. Anyway, that's where we're at. I think the Axis are pretty much. I'm pretty much going to turtle them. They're looking to just to hold on, not take stupid losses, not get beaten, not overextend, trying mad attacks, but just dig in where they can and fall back where they need to, counterattack where they can, and see if they can get through 43 in good shape. And if they can, it'll be interesting. Really interesting to see what pressure the Allies can put on them in 44. I wonder if the British and Russians have to have a real good go at throwing everything they've got into economic warfare where they can, to try and cut German the Germans' ability to fight the war economically, their ability to rebuild, their ability to mobilise during their phases, their ability to counterattack. That might be one way to go, but it's really quite tricky to do that, and you're also relying on very good dice rolls, and it can, one bad dice roll and the Germans can turn the tables and make up a lot of ground. So we'll see what happens, but I certainly think, I don't know how this Russian army is meant to force its way back past these Germans, who are incredibly tough, unless some of those Germans are being forcibly pulled away by some sort of invasion of Western Europe or the Mediterranean. We'll see.